Thank you so much for tuning in to Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have a very exciting individual on today. He is one of the partners at Pear Venture Capital. Now, let me just share with you some of their experience. They have 3 IPOs under their belt. Guardian Health, DoorDash, Sentai Bio, 50 billion total valuations in all their portfolio, $10 billion capital raise. And this individual is one of the partners. He was actually started as one of the founding portfolio companies and then moved into a partnership role, which is really kind of fun. So understanding from a founder to then a successful exit to then being a successful partner in the venture capital and giving back to the community. It's really cool to hear his perspective. He has also first joined the Pear family as a portfolio company, like I said, CEO of a wedding party, a company he scaled and ran for 5 years before selling to Instacart. Okay, very familiar company. It may be going IPO here very shortly. He has built products that have failed and others have which scaled to millions of users. He joined in 2015 as focused on a number of verticals, including consumer, fintech, digital health, and Web3. He helps run PearX and works closely with their portfolio founders as they are just getting off the ground and finding product market fit. So we're going to unpack that a little bit at a detail. So please welcome my next guest, the partner at Pear Venture Capital, the one and only Ajay Kamat. How are you doing today, Ajay?
Hey, wonderful, Christian. Good to be on with you today. I'm really excited to chat.
Dude, I'm excited about this conversation, and I wanted to get into really one of the things I saw on your bio is you say one question is what's your favorite book? And you say the hard thing about hard things. And you say this, the only book that I've ever had to pause reading because it took me back to the anxieties and stress of being a founder. And first of all, I appreciate the authenticity and vulnerability that you had there. But if you could unpack that, and let's start with that, man.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things that I think in this role in venture capital that we really have to be aware of is we're partnering with founders who are building companies. They're starting these companies from scratch. They're putting their hearts and souls and all their time and all their sacrifice into these companies. And it's always important to remember how challenging that is. And I'm very fortunate to have been a founder myself. And so I've been in many of the founders we work with shoes. And I know that it's not easy. And so when I was reading that book, actually I listened to the audiobook. Um, it's written by Ben Horowitz, a partner, the founder of one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz. And he just talks about, the minute details of starting his company and how, he couldn't sleep and, how stressed he was every day at these major inflection points. And it just reminded me of at a much smaller scale, my startup, the challenges that we faced every day. And I think about that all the time. And I think you have to really respect founders who are putting themselves out there to build their companies from nothing.
So when I look at working with founders and investing into their company or whatever as an investor or just collaborating with them and being able to leverage my Rolodex and network to help them in any way that I can, I found that a lot of founders have like certain things that they're really good at, and then they obviously have a co-founder that obviously compensates for their weaknesses, and so it's a really cool team in regards to kind of the structure. When you were building your company, right? What did you feel like were your go-to-market things where you're like, hey, you know what? I excel in these verticals when I'm building the company, and then I needed someone else to assist in these other attributes. What were those for you, man?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, I am by no means talented in every aspect of building products, but there was something that I really loved, which was I loved, creating products that people could use every single day. So, we built a company called Wedding Party. People use our product during their weddings, and weddings, they're not like a super sexy, vertical. But what I loved was on those Fridays and Saturday nights, I would look at our dashboard and there would be, tens of thousands of weddings using our product in real time, hundreds of thousands or millions of people using it. And that idea that people are relying on our service every single day, for the most important moment in their lives up until that point, it really, it got me up in the morning and it put a lot of pressure on our team to deliver a great product experience. So, I think I loved that aspect. I think I was good at being a product manager, designing the functionality and the features. But what I really needed, that's by no means the full team. I had a co-founder that was a product designer that made sure that the flows were really easy to use and that the product was beautiful. I had another co-founder that was our CTO that made sure that the underlying engineering infrastructure was was great so that we could actually scale the product and get it out to millions of people. And we had a little team there, and that's how it started with just 3 folks. Eventually, we grew to a much bigger team. But that group of 3, without us, all 3 of us being there together, we wouldn't have been able to get this product out the door.
So, Ajay, I want to talk a little bit further into this product because that's kind of what your thesis is working with Pear Venture Capital is you work very closely in the with these founding portfolio companies to be able to establish that. But I want to talk a little bit further in when you're looking at go to market and product launch. How much emphasis do you put on the first product launch, or is it more of like, hey, I'm just going to keep kind of getting people excited, and then next quarter we're going to do another one, and it's this constant evolution. The reason why I'm asked this is I was listening to someone in the Y Combinator, and they were talking about this, where they put so much emphasis on that first launch when the reality is, if you think about these Uber or Airbnb, it's like they just constantly kept doing it. They constantly, there's a feedback loop and adjusting and modifying, putting new features and whatever, and adjusting according to what their feedback and their customers want, etc. So I'm curious, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think go to market is a great question. If you talk to first time founders, they're thinking about product market fit. If you talk about second time founders, they're thinking about distribution and go to market fit, right? And I think there's this concept of go to market fit. Every single company needs to define the go to market strategy and channels that are going to work for them, and they need to discover that. It's not actually, if you don't do the work to figure out how to get your product out there, you're not going to have successful distribution. So I think a big product launch in the beginning, it's a tactic. It's by no means like the end all of what you need to do for a company. So it is a strategy that companies can use, but many companies, don't have a big splashy launch anymore. They actually are just quietly growing, iterating, and testing the channels for go to market that they think are going to work. Some people may build a product that they're trying to get to go viral. So that means it's like product driven growth where you're iterating constantly on your invite flows and referral mechanisms. Some companies do paid acquisition. Some people use channels or distribution partners. So there's a variety of different strategies, and every single company needs to figure out exactly what the right strategy is for them to get the company off the ground. And then you need to figure out how do we start getting the company to scale. And you may need to, establish multiple different channels and optimize those. So I think, big launches, they are fun and exciting, but really that's where the work starts, not ends.
So, talking a little bit further as well, and I appreciate kind of giving that emphasis. And I know this is very contextual depending upon this question, it's very contextual depending upon each organization. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Like you mentioned, it's kind of you do a lot and then figure out from that feedback and from that data and where you're going to optimize your focus and energy and the team. I have talked to some SaaS founders where there are individuals where they can easily add a feature or an extra little thing on top of it, but sometimes you're playing in a different vertical or in a different lane when the reality is you should be focusing on this one lane and this is your customer, this is it, and really dialing that in and then scaling and then decide to get into that other lane and compete in that other lane. So my question, and the reason why I'm saying this is because you have this product, it's scaling. At what point do you feel like, okay, we should add some more, or should we take it away, or we very simplify our product to make sure that this is our audience, this is who we're talking with? Because I would imagine your product can be leveraged in other different verticals, in other different environments or ecosystems, but you decided in this ecosystem mainly because obviously that's who you're serving. So I just want to talk a little bit about that a little bit further.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's pretty common that we meet founders who, when they're pitching their idea, they're like, okay, we're focused on this customer. And then from there, we're going to go after customer B, customer C, and customer D. And I think the reality is it's very, very challenging to build a product that goes after multiple different verticals, has multiple lines of revenue with multiple different types of customers. The reason that founders, I think, gravitate towards this idea of having multiple lines of revenue is because when you look at the very large companies, the big public companies like Google and Microsoft, et cetera, they have so many lines of business that everyone kind of thinks like, oh, that's kind of what I want to be. But if you go back to the histories of almost every company, they tend to do one thing really, really well, better than anyone else. And so we try to remind founders that we work with to like hone in on that. Who is your customer specifically? What is the key insight that you have about that customer that no one else has or that you understand better than anyone else in the market? and then you kind of execute against that insight. And you can be doing that for years and keep getting more and more scale if there are enough customers. And that's why the market is really important, that we define kind of ahead of time, how big do we think this market is for this one specific type of customer? And you kind of go after it until you're really successful before I think it makes any sense to focus on different verticals.
Okay, so now with the portfolio companies, and this is what you do, you serve these founders and help them obviously bridge that gap of knowledge and saying, okay, we're going to focus on that. Well, I'm curious, when do you start kind of gravitating into those other avatars and serving those other avatars? Is it a revenue, top line kind of, perspective, or is it more of just a growth perspective and saying, okay, now we are at a level where we've got XYZ, we've dominated this, and now we can kind of gravitate into this. What does that conversation look like in regards to that evolution of the next step?
So that typically happens at later stages than when we are initially working with companies. But what I would say is, for most of the formative years in a company, you're focusing on that one, customer and that one line of revenue. At the point where there's a very strong pull from the market for a different type of customer, and it's very adjacent, meaning you're not like shifting your whole company to focus on a new customer, it could make sense. The key thing here, though, is that it's a very strategic decision. In any startup, and any company really, you're resource limited. So any time, effort, money you put towards anything outside of your core customer segment, you have to really think about, and you have to decide, does it make sense? Does it drive incremental revenue, or does it drive like a 2 or 3x revenue opportunity? And how much effort and how much investment do we need to put into it? So I think, when we're thinking about these types of questions, we try to do really robust analysis and have a strong debate around if it's one, viable, and B, worthwhile for the company to even pursue it. Because many times, even if you were to decide to go after a different customer, it could take, a number of years to get that new product off the ground or that new customer segment off the ground. And you need to decide if you have enough saturation in your initial customer to actually pursue a new avenue.
So many things you need to think about because I've seen companies where they're at eight figures and then they dilute and divert some of their team and they bring it in-house and they start going after this other avatar when the reality is they could have just upsold their current clients, made more margin, and obviously really scale that way. So it's just so interesting when you're having these conversations. I know that that's kind of like you said, later stage that they've got top line revenue, but let's kind of come back a little bit toward the beginning revenue or these pre-seed, seed kind of companies
Yeah.
when you're working with these individuals. And I'm noticing this because of the macro economy, because the macro changed a little bit. I've talked to some venture capital and they're talking about more of efficient businesses more so than grow at all cost. I want to get your perspective. What do you see? Have you guys always been kind of that, hey, we're going to burn a lot. We're going to get, market gain. We're going to, market domination in this. And then we can worry about profitability later? Or is it more like, hey, right now, because of the macroeconomy, we're going to go ahead and optimize for efficiency and decrease the burn and make sure that we have an efficient business.
Yeah, that's a great question. The market ebbs and flows, and there are different trends at different times. Um, Pair has kind of always really been focused on what matters in a business. And for us, that's does the business make sense fundamentally? Do the unit economics make sense? When it costs you, $1 to acquire a customer, how much revenue can you generate out of that customer? How long do you keep that customer? And so these are actually things that we have been talking about with our companies at the earliest stages when it's like 2 or 3 people. It's not that we need those things to be optimized. We just want to start thinking about it. And the reason that Pair has always been that way is because we're a pre-seed and seed stage firm. We specialize at that stage. So by nature, we're not investing, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into a single company. We're investing much smaller amount. And so with the small amount of capital that we invest, we're really trying to understand, is there a viable, path to building a big business here? And in order to get the next round of capital from maybe larger venture capital firms, we need to put together a story around why this company deserves to exist and why this team is the best team to do it. And a lot of times, really understanding your business, even at an early stage, or understanding what the constraints are of the business is very, very important, right? So if you're a consumer company, and like a retail company and the margins are very thin, you should know that in the very beginning versus if you're a SaaS company with a 90% margin. It's really important to understand what type of business you are, what the constraints are, and that defines the path for growth and the path for, the type of company that you're going to be building.
Yeah, and that's actually very interesting you're mentioning this because you guys gravitate toward a lot of different industries, which again we can reiterate. You talk about fintech, you also talk about consumer, you talk about other things as well, verticals. Within that, there are, like you mentioned, there are healthy margins, right? There are healthy kind of business metrics, unit economics that you should look at to say, okay, hey, are we on the right path or are we not? When you're maybe 6 months, 8 months, 12 months into this relationship with the founder, are you able to identify that pretty quickly in regards to like where the squeaky wheel is and identify, okay, this is what the hurdle is that we need to overcome to be able to achieve that next level? Definitely with taking a very active role with your portfolio companies.
Yeah, at the very earliest stages, what we're typically trying to figure out is there any viable concept here at all? Like it's really the foundations of a company. So we're asking questions like, um, can we find 5 customers who absolutely love this product? We can find them anywhere, right? They can be like, they can start with your personal network, we can go door to door knocking on businesses and try to see if they're willing to use our product. We kind of don't care how we get that initial set of users, but do they absolutely love it? Okay. The second phase of the company, and then, can they not live without it, right? Are they running their business on your software or whatever it is? And then the next phase of the company is, okay, are there, 50 or 100 businesses where those 5 came from that are like those companies? And where do we find them? And that's kind of this go to market fit piece of it. And so, um, until we're at that point, it's a little bit difficult to understand, truly the unit economics because we're doing a lot of testing. For those first 5 customers, we may say, hey, let's try $50 a month. And we realize that the number should be lower. Or we realize we're off by a factor of 10, that they can't live without it. And this should be $500 a month. And so that experimentation is happening at the early stages. And only after we really understand how people are using the product, what the market price is willing to bear, can we really understand, the unit economics and some of those questions. But we're asking people to think about those things pretty early, um, even if we don't know the answer. We're just saying keep it in your mind as you explore with your customers in the early stages.
So I used to run a marketing agency and I had an exit in 2021. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I remember numerous times when I would work with a company and we would be in that industry. We would know with our experience and expertise and what we've done with other companies and other clients of ours, we'd be able to leverage some of that, but we would never really understand what would hit in regards to marketing and the conversion, all that, until we started just really testing a lot. Like it was just we had to use a lot of copy, a lot of video copy, all sorts of things. And then from that, and I'm talking like hundreds upon hundreds of copy and hundreds upon hundreds of kind of structured videos and all sorts of things. And then from there, out of that, we could find the really great ones that would hit it out of the park, the good ones, and then like just the mediocre ones. So I'm curious. That's kind of what you explained to me, where you kind of hit a lot, tried a lot, and then from that, you're able to optimize very quickly because you're able to get live data. And that's the whole goal with it. And you can able to structure that very quickly. My question is the way you think about leveraging your resources. When you find a great path where it's like hitting out of the park and you found that, okay, this is hot, something's really taken off here, there's a lot of tailwind. Do you deplete and take off all the resources of everything else in regards to like maybe marketing or going after that individual I'm talking about specifically? And maybe the second and third avatar. Do you shut those other paths off and just focus on that other avatar that's exploding and seeing some tailwind? Or do you say, hey, we're going to put 80% over here, we're going to put 20% toward a good avatar just in case, and then we're going to go ahead and get rid of that other third avatar? And I'm just giving that as an example, but I'd love to get your perspective on the way you think about it.
Yeah. So the early stage, it's very exploratory. You're trying to figure things out. You're testing. You're talking to lots of customers. You're putting products out there. You're iterating. Once we have indication that something is working, we typically, dive in headfirst, and we really try to see how far that can go with that type of customer and with that product. So, and it can start growing very fast, with these software companies. So I would say, 90, 95, maybe more percent of resources are put towards the thing that's working. And typically the companies are very small at this stage. They're like 5, 10, 15 people. And when something starts working, lots of additional cycles get kicked into gear. We need to start hiring more. Maybe we need to raise more capital. And that's when you really want to focus, put your head down and say, okay, we think we have product market fit. We have a go-to-market strategy that's scaling, and now we want to go. And that's really where I think venture capital can be very helpful, and these software businesses can really scale very quickly.
Yeah, because I mean, you're leveraging other people that have had an exit like yourself, that have done that, that have gone into there. And maybe it might be in a different vertical, but the process and methodology is very similar in regards to, okay, what is our strategy? What does that look like? And kind of reverse engineering and making sure that it really hits very well. I want to also ask this. When I'm looking at these companies and when you're getting some top line revenue, you get some momentum going on, there's this, you also have to have talent acquisition, right? You have to hire people, which can be a liability unless you get really amazing players, right? Hire amazing players and you can get like 4x return on that investment because they're doing like 10 jobs, which is amazing, right? So my question though is, there is this balance of making sure that you don't deplete all your resources toward hiring. You want to take some of those resources and of course, deploy toward marketing and sales and all that other fun stuff, and operations. But you also want to make sure you hire amazing people. You guys have an active role in this. And I'm talking about later stage where, million, 2 million, 5 million top line and so forth, and they're scaling. What is that equilibrium? How do you guys see that in regards to like, just navigating that whole structure and that conversation, making sure, hey, we do need to hire, but also we don't want to deplete and have increase our burn rate.
Yeah, I think hiring is one of the most important things startups can do, and it's frequently a place that companies make mistakes. Typically, with the board or with the early investors, a team will decide ahead of time how many employees they need to hire in a given year or in a given quarter. And once that number is agreed upon, that comes with generally a burn rate increase that's typically discussed. We obviously don't want that number to balloon, but it is important to hire and use the capital to make sure that we have the right team in place and get a bunch of really top tier types of folks in the companies. The companies that really end up working, one thing you notice is that they've hired incredibly well. And so we actually noticed this at Pair, that when we surveyed our portfolio, one of the top things that they said that they needed help with was hiring. And so what we did at Pair is we actually set up an in-house recruiting team. So we have four incredible recruiters that we pair with companies, even at the earliest stages, even at the pre-seed stage. And what they do is they help define these things with the teams, which is like, how many people do we need to hire? What is our plan for the year? Um, and then maybe they have never recruited and hired before for their company, so we actually help train them. Like, here's how you put together a job description, here's how you set up the funnel, here's how you interview people. And then on top of that, we also help them source candidates. And so our promise to teams is to help them get their first few engineers in the door, get their hiring plan in place. And that support, that partnership that we have with companies really we found to be very effective. I think we're nearing 100 people that we've helped hire for our portfolio companies just in the last year. And it's really it's very, very clear that this is what teams need. It's a lot of work from our side, but we have an incredible team of recruiters here that's helping us out.
So, do you find when you're working with a lot of founders, you say that they need help? Do you know? Do you feel like they know what they're doing, or is it more of just this drinking for the water hose? Because at the end of the day, you have a problem. You just want to hire someone to solve the problem. Take care of it, move on, right? But it's a lot more difficult than it's easier said than done, right? So my question is like when you're working and you've done a poll with your founders, do you find that they do have some sort of access or some sort of knowledge about how to properly hire someone?
Yeah, I think every founder and every founding team definitely brings something to the table here. Um, One thing to realize, though, is that recruiting for a startup is, you know, a very particular and a particularly challenging type of exercise. I'll give you a few reasons. Number one, startups typically don't have that much money. Startups typically don't have a brand that candidates have typically heard of. Um, so you don't have a track record, you don't have that much money. um, the title may not be what the candidate wants, so there are all these things that kind of work against you. And that's why joining a startup isn't for everyone. And so what we try to do is help the companies identify these high potential types of folks, where a startup makes a ton of sense, because what they really want to do is they want to learn, they want to contribute, they want to grow. And it's a partnership, right? So we look at each company, we see where their strengths are and where their relative weaknesses are, and we really help them in the areas where they need support. Um, and the thing is that we found is like even if you've worked at a large company and you've hired many people, it's not the same thing as when you're a 5-person company and you're trying to get really top tier candidates to join. You're paying so much less, and they've really never heard of, like, why should they take the risk is really the question. And it's not about convincing them to take the risk. It's about identifying the right person at the right point in their career who really wants to dive in head first and work on this company.
Yeah, I was talking to someone as well, and they mentioned the exact same thing where there's amazing A players, but they may need to take a haircut on their pay structure, but they may have equity in the company. But like you mentioned as well, it's a hard conversation to have. Definitely when someone that's well established, they got kids, they whatever, and they you want a CFO or something like that, or COO that's really operational that could grow into it. But like you mentioned, it's not until a later stage where you got some bigger checks to be able to hire those individuals. So it is an interesting conversation. So I appreciate you explaining that and kind of the way you structure and the way you navigate it with a lot of your founders. I want to also ask you a little bit in regards to when you're having these conversations with founders. Okay, in today's world, like we just mentioned, the talent acquisition, you're hiring a lot of individuals, but you want to make sure you have a very clean burn rate. You don't want to obviously balloon like you just mentioned as well. Is there anticipation for growth? And what I mean by that is, of course, you have 1 year or maybe a few quarters where it's like, okay, we've got some good top line, we got momentum going, and then all of a sudden something happens, at a macro economy that you can't control, like COVID a few years back. Obviously, with everything that's going on right now, there's been a lot of industries that have been affected by it, maybe supply chain in the consumer world, right? There's a lot of these factors you may not be able to control. So my question is how do you mitigate that risk, making sure that obviously you want to grow, you want to scale, everybody loves that, that's a sexy thing, but also you want to make sure that, hey, you know what, we've got enough runway for 12 months, 18 months, 22 months, and saying, hey, even if the whole everything goes to shit, guess what, we're good no matter what, I can pay my bills. So what does that look like in regards to mitigating the risk but also deploying a lot of capital back into the business and really scaling? What does that look like?
So the first thing that I'd say is, there's kind of two major aspects when I think about this question. The first is planning. So when you raise some amount of capital, it's very important to understand at the onset how long you think that's going to take you, how much time it gives you. So we typically say now 18 to 24 months um, on a round, and then importantly, what milestones you're going to achieve, right? So it's the combination of those things. And if you're not achieving the milestones, you have to adjust. And that actually is the second point. So the first point is planning, and the second point is you have to be nimble, and you have to constantly look at where things are. Are we growing to plan? Are we growing better? Are we growing worse? Are there macroeconomic headwinds or tailwinds? And you have to be really aware of it. And so what we do when we see something coming up, like when COVID happened, or when we saw there was a big venture capital kind of freeze where there weren't a lot of growth stage investing going on, we literally called every single one of our founders. We shared our opinion on the market, and we asked them to come back with a plan based on the new reality. And that meant slowing hiring, or unfortunately having to do some layoffs in cases, and making sure that you had enough runway to weather the storm. But there was really nothing that you could do before that to mitigate it, other than understanding what your milestones needed to be. The other thing when the venture capital markets kind of slowed down is the milestone you wanted to hit. Maybe you wanted to get to a couple $1 million in revenue. Well, guess what? Now with fewer venture capital dollars in the market, your milestone may need to change. Maybe we need to get to $3 million in revenue. How do we do that with fewer resources? And we go through, again, another round of robust planning discussions, and really talking through how do we achieve those goals. And they're hard. It's very hard. This is why I think being a founder is so hard, because there is a lot you can control, but there's quite a bit that you can't control as well.
And I would imagine the conversation, let's say, for example, because I mean, the numbers are the numbers. You expect a few of the companies to really scale to obviously unicorn status, some that will fall right in between the stars, and then some that, just fall off for whatever reason. So my question is, like, let's say, for example, they don't meet the, milestones like you mentioned. what does that conversation look like, and how does Pair navigate those conversations? Say, hey, are we going to deploy more resources or more help toward these founders, or is it more of just, hey, we're going to have to navigate and mitigate our risk and focus on these other companies and these other portfolio founders that are hitting those milestones and exceeding expectation? Because there is that tough dialogue and that tough conversation a little bit. So I'd love to ask you on that.
Yeah. The story of every company is a roller coaster. I don't know of a single company where it was just very easy. Um, maybe Facebook and Google in the early days just kept going up and to the right. But the truth is that what we really hope to establish with our companies is really good communication and a good working relationship. You never really want to be surprised about something that's going on in a company. You don't want to ever get the call that says, nothing's working and we have 2 months of runway. And we're like, wait, what are you talking about? Like we want to know that ideally much ahead of time so we can plan accordingly. Um, Sometimes a company, and it's really about getting to the bottom of why something is not working. Is a company not hitting its milestones because we haven't executed well, or the thing that we're executing on hasn't worked? Or did we identify that there was an issue, adjust, and the new thing is working, but it just needs a little bit more time? Right? There's lots of different scenarios that we have to think through. And we're here to be long-term partners with companies. Every scenario is different. Our aim is to continue investing in companies from the very first round all the way through the IPO. And it really requires, like I said, good communication with the teams and understanding the plan, and again, just being very nimble. And we love it when founders, even when there's a problem, they understand the problem. They come to us with their plan. They have some questions that they'd like us to answer, and then we just can establish, the strategy going forward, and they're driving it. We just love it when founders are really thinking ahead.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was talking to a lot of other investors, and whenever they're looking at their, whenever they're telling me about their portfolio companies or some of the things that they're kind of deployed into, they always tell me that it's a lot of it context, because you can't just read it off a slide deck and say, these are the metrics, these are the numbers. You got to really ask the founder and say, what's going on? What's the actual situation, the communication? Because then you get the context of like, oh, I see, there are certain factors that you couldn't control that then led you to this obviously thing, but what are we going to do about it now? And having that conversation, that feedback loop to say, hey, where are we going? And so it is interesting. That's why I think it's so fun being able to have people like yourself on that discuss this and talk about it and how to navigate those conversations. I want to dive into when you're looking at the investor as well as the founder relationship. Some investors, or some VCs, I should say, take a very kind of passive role. They write a check, boom, wonderful. And I've heard some founders where it's like, okay, I'm in, they have equity in my company, but I don't ever hear from them, right? Pair, you guys take a very active positioning, right? You guys do, and I'm not going to name, any names that don't take it active, but you guys do. You guys are very, very active in like the talent, the kind of the product market fit, a lot of the marketing side of things. There's a lot of different factors. You guys really help them out. Um, when you're looking at, how do you feel like that has helped, and in your team as well, helped your portfolio companies probably outperform other VCs that don't take more of an active role?
Um, Yeah, I won't comment on other firm strategies, but what I would say is, Pair is a pre-seed and seed stage specialist. Like the companies that we work with, they frequently start with one or two people and just an idea. And so the amount of when you're at that stage as a founder, you're really looking for as much support as you can get. And what we did is we put together a group of founders, who are, many of the partners on our team are founders and have been in the shoes of the founders that we work with. And we really asked ourselves, what is the type of support that you need at that stage? And we put it into practice, right? So finding product market fit, finding go to market fit, getting recruiting and getting the right team in place at the early stages, raising more capital. These are kind of the pillars of support that we really focus on, because we know that without those four things, the company is unlikely to get to the next stage. And so, we want to be the first call or the first text. I'm in frequent communication with many of our founders, and but we're also very honest with founders, right? That's one of the things that I learned as a founder myself, is that time is the resource that that's the most scarce. I want to make sure that people are not wasting their time. So when we're putting our heads down working with the founder, if we have a fundamental question about the approach, we won't beat around the bush. We'll share our concerns and we'll say, let's work through it. Let's, if we need to bring other people, industry experts, for a set of questions that we don't understand, we'll go find those people and we'll figure out the answers to these questions. And we found that you know we're helping people avoid mistakes. We're helping them get the right teammates in the door. We're helping them raise more capital by finding the next venture firms that are good partners. And venture capital takes a long time. It takes many, many years for these companies to grow. But we have seen results with the companies that we work with, and we're kind of scaling our team to provide additional support for more founders across a variety of different verticals.
So when you're looking at these founders in the pre-seed and the pre-rev, there's a lot of due diligence that you have to establish. Is there, and I know you're because you don't have the metrics of the financials, and because they're pre-rev, you obviously relying on the team as well as the idea, right? And my question, when you're looking at that, is are there certain red flags that are automatic no? Outside of maybe the industry or the vertical, and say, oh, we don't look at those companies because they're in that vertical. I'm talking about like maybe the founding team or maybe the founder himself and say, hey, there are certain things or characteristics or whatever that say, okay, automatically we're not going to go. That's a red flag for us. We're going to go ahead and pivot and move something else, and then go and deploy and leverage and work with another founder. What are those red flags for you guys?
Yeah, it's a good question. The question of how do we diligence and make a decision on investing in a company when there's no data, and it's very, very challenging. And you're right, a lot at that point, at that stage, is about who is the founding team, and how are our interactions with them. So it's not just what is their resume and how did the pitch go, but all the communication that we have with the founder when we're following up and asking questions. How are they answering those questions? How diligent are they being? How thorough are they being? Do they really have an insight on the customer? um, why are they working in this vertical? These are all types of questions that we think about, and we're trying to assess in a very small window of time, and with not a lot of face-to-face interactions. Of course, we're meeting the teams in person, but it's not like we're having 10 meetings. We're just having a handful of meetings. I think the biggest red flags are red flags in maybe any type of business. It's stuff like, you know, do we are the founders being dishonest or something like that, right? Um, is there something wrong with the data that they are sharing? And are we getting down to it? Perhaps if there's a very bad reference, when we do a reference check on the founder. But those things don't happen super commonly. It's more about, um, you know, do we really like the market? Do we really like the team? Do we believe in the approach that they're taking to the company? And do we want to bet and partner with them?
Simple enough. I mean, it's simple enough. I mean, but there's a lot that goes into it, like you mentioned. It's also, I would imagine, because you've done it so many times, and you and your team have done it so many times, there's an intuition, right? There's that muscle that is you find patterns, questions, the tonality, the way you have a conversation, the way they dialogue, the way they respond back to you in a respectful or not respectful or in a timely manner, et cetera. There's a lot of those factors that go into it. That's almost, you find these patterns and you build an intuition and build that muscle. That's like, okay, hey, these founders know what they're doing and where they're going. Okay, which makes sense. When you're looking at, I'm also intrigued. What I want to talk about consumer business because I don't invest personally. I don't invest into a lot of consumer business because the margins are so tight. I love tech. I've got some in SpaceX and Stripe because of the margins and whatever, and their defensible moat. And I just, what do you guys see in regards to consumer? I would imagine there are certain things that are very tight, like you mentioned, but also you guys are experts in that. So how do you navigate that, and from seed, pre-seed to pre-rev to really scale into the next level? Because there's a lot of, I mean, cost of goods sold to all sorts of things you have to establish. You got to maybe just really, I mean, direct to consumer. I mean, all sorts of different things you have to think about in the consumer business. So what do you see that it's like, okay, this is where we're going to really dial up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to talk about is that consumer is a very broad vertical, right? You have consumer packaged goods, you have consumer social, you have marketplaces, you have consumer fintech, consumer digital health. It just, there's so many different areas that you could focus on. Um, one of the things is really understanding where you want to focus. So, for example, we don't do very much consumer packaged goods for a lot of the reasons that you just stated, which is it's difficult to create a brand. The margin profile is very difficult. How do you distribute these products? How big of an outcome can they actually be? At the same time, we do focus on a variety of different verticals like marketplaces and consumer social. Consumer social is so interesting because it has produced some of the largest companies in the world, but it also produces many, many, many failures because lots of attempts are made. It's relatively easy to start a consumer social company, but it's very, very difficult to get something that hundreds of millions of people use every day or more to establish a business model that can actually work. I don't have the answer to how do you find that type of company. What I do know is when you're looking at a consumer social company in the early days, you're looking for the types of traits that are going to be required to make it successful. So I'll give you an example. Number one, in the very early days of the company, when you have like 500 or 1,000 users, how are those users using the product? Right? Are they using it every day? Are they using it 10 times a day? Is there anything really interesting that we can see in the early data, even if it's not tons of users? Is there anything like interesting there? And is there a consumer behavior that we think is novel that many more people will want, and we will do? And we have to kind of sit and think about that, even with a small amount of data. Number two, is the team established such that they're able to iterate very quickly? Like on consumer social, you have to be able to try, many different features in very short order. So, if they, for example, have an outsourced development team where they're kind of doing these long, development cycles, it's probably a no-go. But if they have a really small, nimble team where they're trying lots of different features very quickly, and they're collecting the data and they're assessing the data and they have like a really robust product roadmap that they're iterating through, those are all great signs. Then, of course, we have to decide, do we like this concept or not, right? And that's, amongst our partnership, how we have to decide what we like. But it's it's a little bit of art and it's a little bit of science, and again, it's extremely difficult to get it right. But you do try to establish these types of assessments to see if it's worth making an investment at the early stages.
So and I appreciate you kind of reiterating that, unpacking that a little bit. So you stay away from the CPG world, like consumer packaged goods, and then focus on these other verticals. Specifically, I want to talk about this social. Just like you mentioned, it's easy to create one, but it also, as we're seeing, there's a lot of fight in that game. Do you find that there's a defensible moat in that's pretty strong when you're looking and doing due diligence on these founders? You look at the idea and the defensible moat as well, or is that kind of hard to analyze because it's not actually proof concept yet, and there's got to be a lot more data associated with it?
You typically don't have a moat in the very early stages of these consumer social companies. But we do try to think about what that moat could be, right? Like what type of data are they collecting that no one else will be able to collect? And what type of user behavior do they have? But if you look at, like, the thing about consumer social companies that's always very fascinating is if you look at a product and you put an engineering team to build the exact same product, they typically can. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to build the same company, because what's difficult is not only building the product, but acquiring the users, making sure that the users are inviting others, creating a behavior and establishing a habit with that customer base. Those things are very, very challenging. And it's not just like the engineering, product that makes that happen. There's lots of additional strategies to make that happen.
I want to talk a little bit about this because I always found this so fun. So I analyzed, I was reading this one article about how Slack grew, how Facebook grew, and these other software companies and these other companies, and they focused on at a certain point. I don't know exactly what point, top line, but they focused on one metric that basically uh, directly affected every other metric, right? If they wanted more ad revenue, if they wanted more people, if they wanted more whatever, right? All that flew down this one metric. And so they focused on that one metric. Facebook, for example, was, hey, if we were able to get that one person on and signed up for Facebook and get them 7 new friends, the likeliness of them staying on is drastically higher, right? Almost a 10x.
Right.
Same thing with Slack. Slack they said, hey, if we're able to get the team to use and deploy like 22 messages within the team, the likeliness of them using that at a higher level for that team is so much more, right? So that was like their one metric. How fast can we get them to, use this to 22 messages on Slack, right? Or, get them to seven friends within a very short period of time frame. But the reason why I'm asking this is because as you are scaling these businesses and coming alongside them, you would imagine at some point there is that inflection point where you're saying, okay, hey, we got to focus on one key metric, one KPI that obviously is the highest leverage activity that basically directly affects every other KPI in the business and the structure. What does that look like in regards to, and again, I know it's contextual, I know it's feedback, I know it's data, but the evolution or the methodology on getting that KPI and identifying that in the business?
Yeah. So, there's lots of different ways of looking at this. At a high level, I would say the type of concept you're talking about is a concept called activation. So, when you get a customer in the door, that doesn't mean that they are going to necessarily become, a locked-in user. So, we typically look for what is the type of behavior they need to do that the most successful customers or the most successful users, what do they do in the very early days of using the product? So we're kind of like looking for it, right? So let's say you get 100 customers in a day or in a month, and a month later you look at how many of those are still active, and let's say it's like 20. Okay, so then what we do is we look at what those 20 people did in the first minute after signing up, then the first day, then the first week, then the first 2 weeks, and you can start identifying some trends, right? You may say, like, let's call it like a photo sharing app. If a person came in the door, did they take and post at least one photo within the first hour of signing up? The people who did that were more likely to be active users 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later. And then what you try to do, once you can identify that, then what you try to do is you build the onboarding flow to encourage people to take that first photo when they first sign up. Those are the types of things you can do. But by the way, even that strategy they just talked about doesn't mean that it's going to work then for everyone. Then what will happen is more people will come in and take a photo on the first day, but still, not all of them will become activated, and you have to do the same process over and over again. So what I would say is, the Facebook 7 friends, and the Slack one, 22 messages. Those are probably snapshots in time, and they're constantly iterating and looking at that data to see what's the most relevant in any given time, and they're constantly iterating the product. One thing that I really think about when it comes to these products is that they're really alive. Like, they're constantly being developed. They're never finished. They're projects that engineers and product teams are constantly working on, and so the data is changing all the time, and it's important to take an active look, at any point in the company, on how the product is performing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. And that is a whole different conversation as well, the iteration aspect and the optimization, just to be relevant in the marketplace. Because in free enterprise, they could easily deploy their capital somewhere else unless you stay relevant and top of mind for these individuals. So I think and we're seeing this actually very interestingly with a lot of these big brands. But like I mentioned, we'll have to have you on to have a conversation about that another time. Ajay, I really appreciate you being on here, just talking about Pair and you, venture capital firm you guys represent, and the way you are able to really help these founders at a very, very micro level, really taking a very active approach in their go to market, their product development, there are all these things that really are initiative to make sure that they launch correctly and get some good revenue and get some good tailwind behind it. Definitely in this crazy market right now. For those that want to reach out, maybe there are founders that obviously need access. You guys have a really cool process and a lot of knowledge and a lot of resources. Excuse me, that's the word I was looking for. Resources on you guys' website. But how do they reach out to you and be part of what you got going on, my man?
Yeah, it's actually, we're really open. We're very busy, but our job is to meet founders all the time. So you can find our contact information on our webpage. People can email me. I'm Ajay at pair.vc, and happy to get in touch with folks that are building companies.
Very well said. And guys, to make it very simple, I will put all those links in the description below. I'll put his LinkedIn, his X, his Twitter, as well as the website, so you guys can reach out to him and connect with Pear Venture Capital. And Ajay, just before I let you go, I thought this was really cool. So one of your quotes on the website here in your bio: "Telling the truth is easier than lying." And of course, it's like I love that kind of common sense. But I want to ask you, what was the evolution of that, man?
I think I have a bad memory. And so if I ever lied, I would always get caught in it later on when I was younger. So I realized this, I think after meeting my wife, it's better to just be honest and straightforward, and then you can be logically consistent throughout. And that's worked well for me.
Very well said. Yeah, because otherwise it's stressful remembering all those lies. Who did I say what to win? What? Well, I appreciate it, guys. Guys, that is my friend, the partner at Pear Venture Capital, the one and only Ajay Kamat. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.